So anytime I'm done having machine work done, I've always been told to clean the cylinders with warm soapy water and a washcloth. I just use dish soap on them and I wash them real good, hot water and a good terry cloth towel. After I'm done that, I take WD-40 and a paper towel and I wipe them down real good. And you'll be surprised you even get more dirt off of them when that happens. So I just take it, spray it down, and then go over both of them real good. Anything that's metal on them that can rust, make sure to get that off. You can see, even though they were washed, there's still dirt comes off. It's also important that your head gasket surface and your base gasket surface are really clean, because when you go to bolt everything up and torque it down, if they're dirty, the gasket won't sit right, and that can cause you leaks. Here's a little trick that John from John's Cycle does for my cylinders. He puts a little bit of a bevel on my cylinders. Now, I'm not sure if the Evo ones come with that or not. He puts it on my shovel head cylinders. Bevel will allow you to install the piston and rings, and the rings go on really easy if you have just a little 45 there. Makes it so much easier to install them. In fact, on my shovel, the bevel that he puts on, I don't even need a ring compressor to put them on. So now that these are all cleaned up, I'm going to get the top end started. This is the rear piston. This is the intake, so this is the front of the engine on the Harley. The wrist pin are where my fingers are in it. One of the oil rings here, I put the expander gap here, and the other oil ring here, so it's a triangle. When you're installing the expander, it's important to put it in so that they're not overlapped. They have to butt up against each other. And when you install it, the tabs are facing up is how I've always done it, like just like this. So I'll put this on first. All the instructions I've ever seen always say to use a ring expander. I've done plenty by hand, but I'm going to follow the instructions. Okay, that's in. You can see right there, they're not overlapped, that they're butted up against each other. Now I'm going to put the bottom ring in, and there's no direction on this ring. This one goes below the expander. Can't use my tool with this one, it just slips through. So I'm just going to spin them on. Now once I get it on, make sure I get the gap in the right spot, like that. So that gap's here, the butt end's still there. Now I put the top oil ring in. And that gap will need to go here. So the top ring's here, bottom ring's here, and the expander is here. And that puts them in perfect triangle. Now we'll get the second ring in. You want to make sure when you're putting your rings in, it doesn't have any dots here or here, because the dot would have to go one direction or the other. It'll call that out in your instructions. And sometimes the ring is beveled, and that bevel will play a part in which way it's installed, either this way or this way. If it doesn't have any markings like this one, it does not matter. In the Keith Black instructions, it doesn't give you a specification on where to put the ring end gaps. So I use the Weisco specs, and that's where they're coming from. For the second ring, it tells you to put it in line with the wrist pin, and the top ring the opposite side of the wrist pin. So I'm going to install this one, and for this I will use my tool. And I only want you to spread it open enough to get the ring on. There it is. The same with the top ring. If there's a dot or a bevel, generally you want to look at the instructions and see where that goes. I know on the Weiscos faces up. So now I'll turn the piston 180 degrees and I'll install this ring here like this. There you have it. Now the rings are on. I'll do the other piston off camera. I always like to pour about 1/4 of a quart of oil into the motor, and when I do it, I make sure to pour a good amount of oil over top the rods and the bearings, so I have the rods in the up position. Then after that, I make sure to rotate it around a little, make sure it gets in on those bearings real good. Now that I have that done, before I put the wrist pins in, I make sure I use a good assembly lube and coat the bushing for the wrist pin real good, and then coat the wrist pins before I put them into the pistons. I also coat the wrist pin hole. In the instructions, they tell you to take the spiral locking rings for the wrist pin and spread them apart about 1/2 to 3/4 to get your thumb in between the coils. So I'll take one of the pistons and install one of the rings. They tell you once you get it started to get a small straight blade screwdriver to help spiral it in. Okay, now I got the one in. This is the front, and I'll put this on. It goes on like this with the intake being in the middle. Before I put the piston on the rod, I'm going to put the base gasket on. And the front one. Okay, now both base gaskets are on. Now I have it down. I already took the tool out and probably forgot to record it. The tool's out. Now I just feed it into the bore like that, and then give it the last push, and it's all the way down. And it's all the way down now. If you watched my previous video, you saw that I went with a Cometic 20,000 thick crushed head gasket. And the part number on that head gasket is H081320S. And it's 20 thousandths after it's crushed. Now that I have the bolts in finger tight on the rear head, I can spin the motor without having to worry about the cylinder coming off, because the rings now provide resistance. And you can see the skirt of the piston right here. Again, I'll just take a clean towel and put it over here so I don't have to worry about anything falling in. Here's the next piston. You can see it's marked with an F for front, and this is the intake. Goes on like this. I'll start the wrist pin outside the piston. Set it over top. Put my finger on one side for a guide. And then in it goes. Double check that my rings are in the right spot. Now I'll put some oil on the piston. Now I come in with my ring compressor tool. Try to give it even all the way around the piston. Give it a good squeeze. Now I come in with the cylinder. You can see it slides on there real nice and easy. I just rock it down, and then that's it. That's how that's done. Now you just sneak it out of here. Like that. Take my rag out. Make sure that the base gasket's nice and clean. Nothing's on its way. Now I just rock the cylinder down onto the piston. Like that. Get a rag and catch that extra oil that's coming off. Now I'm just going to rotate the engine to get the piston off top dead center. Like that. Got a little brake clean on a rag. I'll clean this head gasket surface off real good. I don't even want any oil on that when I'm torquing it down. Now I'll take and make sure this is clean with a little more brake clean. Okay, now that I got it all clean, I'm going to put it on. First I put on my Cometic Head Gasket. Now I'll put the head on. Make sure that the rivets aren't interfering with anything, and they're not. Now I'm just going to hand put a couple bolts on so I don't have to worry about anything falling. When you're torquing a head bolt on an Evo or any other Harley motor, it's important that you put oil on the underside of the head and also oil on the threads. That way you get a much truer torque. But it's also very important not to get so much oil in there that you hydrolock them. So after you put oil in them, you set them like this and allow the excess to drip out. That's really important. Per Cometic's instructions, you start with the short ones, 1, 2, then the long, 3, 4. So the torque sequence has you doing it 5 times. 9 pounds, 14 pounds, 22 pounds, 35 pounds, and then the final torque at 42 pounds. Now, one thing they don't say in these instructions, but I learned over time, is you have to keep torquing them until the bolt doesn't move at each torque interval. So at 9, you keep going around the pattern at 9 until they just don't move. That way it brings that head down even the whole way. What can happen is you tighten number 1 down to 9 foot-pounds, and then when you go around the sequence, 1 can end up being loose, and then you tighten that down and 2 gets loose. So it's important to keep going around until the torque doesn't change. So first I'm just going to put them in by hand. I'm just going to bring them down till they touch. Now I'm going to go around at 9. Now I'm going to go back around a second time, and you'll see this will probably move. And you see it did move. So that's why it's very important to keep going around on them. That one didn't. That one did. That one did. So again, I just keep going around at 9 until there's no movement. All right, none of them moved that time. Now I'm going to go to 14. Again at 14. And that one moved. That one didn't. That one did a lot. And that one did. And one more time. Okay, none of them moved that time. I'm going to go to 22. With torquing, you can go as many steps as you want. It's better to go slow than try and do it all in one bite. Now at 35 foot-pounds. And now at 42. The final torque. Okay, at 42 I went around 3 times, and that head is good to go. Now I'll do the other one off camera. So after letting them sit for an hour, I come back and go through the torquing sequence 2 more times at 42 foot-pounds, just to make sure that the gaskets didn't squish and that the torque was correct, and it is. I only have the front head bolted down. I am sticking the manifold in here. The alignment on these manifolds really can't move because the heads have dowel pins that hold them in place. The older bikes, you do want to leave them loose. You want to check the manifold alignment before you torque them down. This one happens to be very well aligned already, and I don't even have the rear cylinder torqued down yet. But I did want to just point that out. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments.